Integration and by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Israel. And without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Gili Drori to have a welcome greeting note.
Good afternoon. It is the day for us here at the Hebrew University and elsewhere to note Europe Day, and for us at the European Forum, where we study year-round European affairs and focus on research on European affairs. For us, this is a day to convene during the day to show European faces in the forum, but this afternoon to convene around this issue of the open sky for a discussion that bridges academic perspectives, research perspectives on the flow of people from the European continent here, but also to talk to practitioners who put this agreement that is changing the relations of Israel to Europe, to put this perspective on, to shed this light onto. I'm standing here to thank you all for joining us this afternoon on behalf of the European Forum at the Hebrew University, and particularly thank a few of the participants here. I'll start with Mr. Herman Bunz from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Israel. Thank you very much for your partnership with us for bringing up this event into fruition. I'm also thankful to Ambassador Emmanuelle Jouffret for joining us yet again for an event here at the European Forum. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the discussion, and thank you for the long-standing cooperation of the delegation of the European Union to the State of Israel with activities done here at the European Forum. I thank Mr. Giora Ron, the former Director of Civil Aviation Authority, for bringing his view from the inside and a practitioner's perspective. And I thank all of you for joining the discussion. They'll let us, at a certain point, raise our hand and ask the questions and add on our comments as well. Last and definitely not least, I'm thanking on behalf of all of us, Dr. Maya Sion Tzidkiyahu, because you put it all together. And Maya stands in the junction of all three banners that we see. Thinking of the event and organizing it, I thank you very much.
So, Mr. Herman Bunz, who is the director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Israel, who's been to Brussels a lot and probably uses open skies quite often.
Yes, it's true. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, I would like to welcome you to this afternoon, which is a great pleasure for me because I am still living in Brussels, although I have been working in Israel for years. 2005, 2003 to 2009, and we know each other with the ambassador, and we recognize each other when we entered the room. So this is a pre-remark. The second remark is that I am living in Brussels as a German. This is possible, said one of your country fellows to me, because you can change the border as you like. It's true. I don't know where the border is actually, but I'm living still in Brussels and Uccle, and I love it to live there because it's a fantastic city. Don't underestimate Brussels. That's very much in common with Tel Aviv, where I'm now. Sorry for those who are swearing on Jerusalem. The second remark is a very short one as well. I'm German, and we are cooperating with you in a great way. But we still remain Germans, so we need lists where you can sign your name because you will probably taste of the fantastic food, and we're sitting in the room and so on and so forth, and we participate with our partners at the Hebrew University in paying all this. And the German people, the taxpayer, want to know where the hell are the Stiftung people spending their money. So you do us a great favor in signing the list. Thank you very much. The third remark I would like to do is the following. When I started my work in Israel in 2003, it was a completely different situation. The younger of you amongst us might remember the parents' scarcity. And when I was here, I went to the old, for me, old port in Tel Aviv. And it was not the nice, fancy little scene like now. It was a rotten port with old Chevy shacks and so on and so forth. And I was sitting there having my glass of white wine and was watching to the sky, and there was coming on Friday afternoon one plane after the other, just not to miss the preparation for Shabbat, of course. And then Shabbat, it was empty. The sky was empty. And Shabbat evening, they started again. Today, my friends visit me, and they come on Shabbat, and they arrive at Shabbat. And the planes leave Israel, and they come. And they leave, they come. So, in other words, it's a completely different situation in the port of Israel. You cannot drink as much wine as you like, because it's so much going on the sky. So the sky is open to us, at least this is open to us. And I think it's a very good advantage, a great advantage that you made it possible to make an agreement with the European Union, to make an agreement on the open sky issue. It is one of the most fascinating stories and histories of the European Union, the open sky policy. When it started, I don't want to lecture you now. No, don't believe that. I just want to encourage you to follow this line. This is a fantastic line you put at on the European Day, the open sky policy, the Israel-European open sky agreement. What impact after 5 years? How many planes are now coming? My friend, and probably the next director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Brussels, in Tel Aviv, or respectively in Herzliya, Paul Pasch, showed me with proud in his heart 2 planes per day from Germany. 2 planes per day today? You wouldn't dare to negotiate with the Israeli authorities about 2 planes per day. No, more than 2, of course, and more than Lufthansa, and cheaper. This is a very good approach. So what is now to be done is to think about the impact and to reflect about the impact. And I wish you all the best for this very serious exercise that is going on at the Hebrew University. And I believe me, I could say a lot of things about this university as well, because we have a long-lasting history also with this university. And I think the best thing is to do is to go into the middle of the questions we have to put. The open sky policy is in progress, but to what impact has this progress on our bilateral relation? I know the problems of the Israeli politicians with the European Union a little bit, because this is our daily bread, so to speak, which we have to eat. The problems are there, but this is a little hole where we can look at the sky and say, it's open, the sky is open, and it's not limited. Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
So I'm the last speaker, and I will do this, despite the fact that I'm here at the European Forum, I will do it in my second hat as the co-president of the Israeli Association for the Study of European Integration. And it's a great pleasure to see such a big crowd on this really, I think, nice topic to address. The Israeli Association has actually dealt with many of the pluri-crises that the European Union has been going through in the last few years. So we dealt with the migration, refugee crisis, and with Brexit, and with Euroscepticism, with the rise of right, extreme or populist political parties, and we've done this whole line of multi-crises. And it gives me a pleasure to actually talk about something positive once the EU is already stepping out of this, finally, and hopefully, knock on wood, it will continue. So the road ahead for the European Union is not that easy yet, but it still gives us a chance to talk about, I think, a positive issue also in terms of the relations. So within the internal challenges of the EU, it has actually managed to cope with all those fluid crises. But if we look external at the external relations of the EU, we see there that the EU still has quite a lot of challenges in a sense. The Israeli political relations were mentioned already, but we are here to actually discuss the economic, or part of the economic relations, which is a positive side to the relations. And we are, as Professor Gili Drori was mentioning, we are only 2 days away from another celebration, from Europe Day celebration, from May 9th, the day in which European integration process actually kicked off through the European Coal and Steel Community in 1952. And since then, the EU has moved a long way from coal and steel, but already we see the roots of the Open Sky Agreement at the Treaty of Rome, 1957, where the transport policy was put on the agenda as one of the integration policy fields to advance for a single market in aviation. But in effect, that only took place since 1992. It began to take place, the open skies within the EU began to take place only in the 90s. So it took about 4 or 5 decades to actually develop it within the EU. And only 5 years ago, Israel has signed the Open Skies Agreement, and we are next on the line. So what the EU has done is actually to take the competition policy and implement it vis-a-vis the national carriers such as Air France, British Airways, Italia, Lufthansa, which was mentioned. And that was the first step actually to open the skies for competition. And that led, this enhanced competition played a role in economic growth. Transport contributes almost 5% of the EU GDP, close to 550 billion euro. It sustains more than 11 million jobs in the 28 member states. In 2015, there were more than 920 million passengers annually in the EU 450 airports, and that is a triple from the number of 1992. Obviously, the single European aviation policy has impressive economic, employment, social, and cultural benefits, to name just a few. And one of my friends was mentioning the culinary aspects of it, and that's what she does. So traveling and experiencing new places and cultures has become more accessible and affordable to many people in Europe during the past 5 years, and now to Israel and to Israelis, which are taking advantage of this, as we say, big time. The EU has also signed Open Skies Agreement with the USA, with Canada, so much bigger and more important markets than the Israeli one. And also there's a list of neighboring countries that the EU has signed such Open Skies Agreement with them. So it's Morocco, Jordan, Balkan countries, Moldova, Georgia, and more are on the way. And with such enhanced competition, there are many benefits and beneficiaries, but I would like us to take the opportunity today to try and examine also if there are losers and if there are losses from this agreement. Obviously, Open Skies Agreement has made the pie bigger, so there is more for everybody, but I would also like to ask who are the losers from this agreement, and to highlight also them and to take them into consideration, how perhaps can we compensate those losers. I would like to take the opportunity to thank, again, you've heard the things, but I would like to stress it now, from the Israeli Association for the Study of European Integration, for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, for the ongoing cooperation with the Stiftung that allows us to hold many activities. This is the third activities that the association is holding. And we're going to have another one on the 18th of June, which will deal with social inclusion of young people in Europe and in Israel. It will actually deal with the EU youth strategy. So what the EU is calling youth, we are almost after the army already. So in Israel it's called young adults. And the Israeli government is currently working on a strategy for young people in Israel, and we have a lot to learn from the EU, and they have a very advanced agenda on this. So I invite you to join us on the 18th of June. This will take place here at the Hebrew University with the European Forum and with the Public Policy for School and Government, and with Friedrich Ebert, of course. Of course. And of course, I wish to also thank the European Forum. The idea for this, to hold an event on open skies was by the former director, who will meet in the roundtable in the second panel, Professor Noam Shoval. And I'm really pleased that Professor Gili Drori was welcome to embrace this wonderful topic and go along with it. And I very much want to also thank Elisheva Moati, the administrative director of the European Forum, for helping to gear all this event together. What the association is trying to do is to stimulate debate about the European Union as an integration process, to have critical thinking, to advance the knowledge and critical thinking regarding the European integration process and its relations with Israel. I invite you to become a member of the association. We have Facebook, we have a website, we have also YouTube channel, and this is all will be on camera. And last but definitely not least, I do want to thank very much our speakers today, whom I'm going to now shortly introduce. So, with a great pleasure to introduce Major General Tribe Giora Rom. I'll go through the history. It's a long and very prestigious. I think it's I'll do it shortly, and I think you deserve it. So we'll begin with the fact that he was served as a combat pilot and was the Israeli Air Force first jet ace, which means that he took down a lot of enemy fighters. He made our sky open in a security manner, absolutely. He was deputy commander of the Israeli Air Force, Israel's military attaché in the United States and Canada. From '96, he was appointed the Directorate General of the Ministry of National Infrastructures, then Directorate General of the Jewish Agency. And he is today, because between 2008 and 2014, he served as the Directorate General of the Civil Aviation Authority, Rashut Toufa Ezrachit. And during his tenure, and very much, the credit is actually very much to your behalf, he was, part of his overall responsibility was on Israel's aviation rights. He led Israel through the negotiation process that lasted more than 3 years. It was hard negotiation, and signed the Open Skies Agreement with the European Union, and we all, I think, are in debt to you because of that. And since 2016, Giora Rom is serving as the chairman of the Israel National Road Safety Authority. He has a BA, since we're in a university, I have to mention that. He has a BA in economics and political science from Bar-Ilan University and MBA from UCLA, Los Angeles. Please.
This is Maya, and this is me. For me, the request to speak in this event was kind of a wake-up call. This is in my previous life, all my previous lives. And I happily agreed to see if I remember anything from the process. It was a unique experience. I had previous experience in negotiation, but on the military side, I was, as Maya said, the defense attaché in Washington, and before that in other positions in the Israeli General Staff and the Air Force. But such a political level negotiation I didn't have before. I say the word I, which I don't like, because every time you say I, you mean me and a group of people without whom nothing happens. So I want to thank the Israeli team. Only two of them are here in this room, and I want personally to thank Ishai Donichia, who is going to be part of the who is going to participate in the second part of the discussion, who was my right-hand man. And no matter what kind of leader you are, at the end of the day, you need somebody to talk to discuss with, to consult with, to put on the table your hesitations and your doubts, and to build together the strategy. And I'm waiting for the second part of this afternoon to learn how far or close is today's situation from the wide set of 5 years ago forecasts that we had and many had. When Maya asked me what I was going to talk about, I said open skies, an exercise in bridging two cultures. I use the word culture because culture, it's like a recycled bin word. Everything can be put into cultures. But when I thought about it a little bit deeper, I thought it should have been between two unequal partners, or maybe between two different utility functions, or even better, between two different agendas, which is what I found throughout the 3.5 years. I want to make a personal note about the beginning of the process. I was in Washington, D.C. 2 months after I was nominated as the Director General of the Civil Aviation Authority, trying to see how do I fix something that was badly damaged before. So I went to the FAA, and then I got a telephone call that instead of flying back to Israel, to fly to Brussels and to join the team that was planned to have a seminar in the beginning of the Open Skies Agreement. So I arrived, that was December 2014. Should I say it was heavily rain? It was very rainy night. And I came. I spent some time in the EU. Once I'm there with a Greek lady called Mrs. Komartsiotti, Olga Komartsiotti. She didn't speak about open skies. She gave me terrible time about the safety of Israeli aviation. So I was going downhill, and then I went to the hotel and I met the whole group. We spent, the following day, we spent the seminar. I didn't understand the word because I didn't know anything about civil aviation, let alone about civil aviation, flight rights, and relationship between countries. And then we met again at the hotel. And the head of our delegation, the Director General of the Ministry of Transportation, said that he had an announcement. He is going to take a flight to Israel that night, and I'm becoming, Giora will be the head of the delegation for the talks that had to start the following day about a subject I knew zilch. And that's the way I jump to the pool, not from the children's side, but from the very deep side. But I knew that it was an Israeli government decision. Now for you, for those who are not Israelis, government decisions in Israel do not have to be carried out. About 30–40%, not more than that. But speaking about culture, I'm coming from the culture of the Israeli Air Force. In the Air Force, when there is a decision, it is done. We do it. So it was a government decision, and I'm going to make it happen. I know very little about the subject, so I have to understand profoundly the matter. And I understood that it might have historic ramifications, positive or negative, I didn't know. And of course, it depends on, to whom it is positive or negative. Now, before I continue to speak, I want to go to the board there for a moment to try to sketch the whole issue. So I'll take this. I don't know if it is long enough. It will take me all the way. Do I need it?
It usually helps.
We can bring this to you.
This is the finish.
Can you put it?
We can put it on, we can roll it.
No, so people will not
Yeah,
see.
we'll roll it to the other.
אולי תשים את זה פה אחרי השולחן.
אתה תגיע אליו? אוקיי.
אולי אחרי השולחן. Let's assume that I can make an XY kind of system. This is Israeli GDP, and this is the nature of the market. Remember, the nature of the market. That goes from monopoly, only one carrier to each destination, all the way to full open skies, free economy. The hypothesis was that when you go to the open skies, that's the way the GDP goes. It goes up. Otherwise, you don't need it. At that time, in 2013, no, 2013 is much later, but we started without open skies to go for a process of adding carriers to different cities. Not only El Al and Air France to Paris, or El Al and Lufthansa, and so on, but to add 2, 3, 4 carriers. But it was not an open market, so we were here. And the Israeli I will call them momentarily opposition, argued that the real curve is going to be like that. At the beginning, it will be as if GDP goes up, but the process and things that will happen will destroy the Israeli economy, the Israeli aviation, and the losses will be much bigger than the gains. And once the Israeli aviation is destroyed, the European will decide the cost of the tickets and so forth. So in fact, the challenge that I thought that we were facing, and I was ready to accept that at the beginning it will not be a linear function goes northeast, but a parabola, kind of an inverted parabola. So the challenge that we had was how to make it look like this. After there is some kind of a stop, to make sure the direction is northeast and not southeast. So in fact, the challenge that we as the Israeli delegation had was to create or to build an agreement that will help Israeli economy through the Israeli aviation and Israeli tourism to behave according to this line. So the impact on GDP will be positive and not negative as we move to the right. And one of the things that we made at this point, before fully open skies, and I'm sure that it will be discussed deeper in the panel, was to come with the idea of what we call gradual implementation, which was part of the agreement. So in fact, what we were facing is to carry out and to create an agreement, to build an agreement that will look like roughly the blue line. Now, back to so this is the model that tries to explain what was the Israeli challenge. And I want to speak about Israel. Israel was described by many, including myself, in a unique political and geographical situation, unlike almost any other country in the world. The only connection that we have with the world is through aviation. No one in this room has taken a ship to go to New York. I think the last time we took a ship was to Kushka, to Constantinople. And trust me, during the Operation Protective Edge, the Hamas identified it very clearly, and they understood that if they succeed to close down Ben Gurion, they make the point that Israel is isolated. And in fact, that was a curfew that they thought about to answer the curfew that was on the Gaza Strip at that time. So we have to protect and maintain Israeli aviation, because another assumption was that in case of emergency, no one will fly to Israel. And we need Israeli carriers. So it was not only for national pride that those who opposed the agreement thought that it was a bad agreement or bad idea, but really the very specific and unique situation of Israel. And then, of course, on top of that, one has to add the security issue. We have different security procedures compared even to European carriers. And that was part of the doubts. So the question on the Israeli side was, is the agreement an existential threat to the Israeli aviation future? As they said, there will be no Israeli operator. So we found ourselves, when we represented Israeli aviation, that it was an exercise in threat mitigation, how to make sure that Israeli aviation continues to live and to operate and to make money. Parentheses, if one believes that one can make money in aviation, which is a very big question. It's a different question. How to mitigate the threats. But the deeper I went into the issue of the negotiations, I saw that it was negotiations ostensibly between two aviation institutions, the Israeli one and the European one, even though very asymmetric ones. 40 planes in Israel, 4,000 planes in Europe. In fact, aviation should serve tourism. And the whole idea of the climbing GDP is through tourism and not through just flying. People are not flying just for the sake of flying. And every time we enter the negotiation room, either in Brussels or in Tel Aviv, there were two tiers, the negotiation teams, and the second tier were the stakeholders, the Cockpit Association of Europe, and the El Al, Arkia, and Israel, and Kal of Israel, that sat in the room to make sure that we do not sell them short. Either the European side or the Israeli side. But the more I went into it, I thought about the tourist guides, the hotels, the women that run the spas in the Dead Sea, whatever you have in Tiberias, in Arad, in Eilat, everywhere. And no one really represented them. There were only pilots sitting behind me, and their lawyers. They do not move without lawyers. The Israeli second tier dealt most of the time in trying to close every loopholes they could think about, no matter how small or remotely plausible. I'll give you an example. We dealt a lot with making sure that we have the option that an Israeli carrier will fly, from Milano to Stockholm. There will be a line, Milano-Stockholm, Stockholm-Milano, operated by El Al. Chances that it will happen is about 10 in the -3 or the -4. But we wanted to have all the options. And we found ourselves, in retrospect, spending time on all kind of small chances scenarios rather than understanding the macro model. And one of my conclusions from the process was that if you don't have a strong macro understanding of what you are heading into, you may lost in the ocean of small details. And the agreement, I think, is about 160 pages in very small, small type, small print. The European side, tourism to Israel was not their goal or interest. I don't have the figures about tourism in Europe, but I tend to believe that the tourism to Israel is not a major part of where Europeans are flying. between May and December or wherever. The European side, I think, and this is a very personal vision of me, view, they wanted to expand the presence and influence zone of the EU to countries that were not part of the EU. They did it through other vehicles like the Euromed. We were also part of what was called, or is called, the Euromed, where North Africa, Egypt, Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, for instance, were part of Euromed without being part of the EU. But the Euromed idea was created. And the idea was, and I speak only about the aviation world, not about any other sphere of activity, in order to build a counterweight to the American bloc. Now, this is not just a matter of, again, of pride or, for instance, as we speak, I think, I'm out of aviation now, the United States and Europe are building very advanced, modern, future air control systems. Investment, we are talking about investment of dozens of billions of either dollars or euro, but they are different in America and in Europe. When we started to deal with something called FTL, stands for Flight Time Limit of pilots, there are two different systems. There is the European system and the American system that regulates the flight time of cockpit crews and cabin crews. So Europe was trying to create a block large enough that will offset the American, at that time, control of the sky, of the skies through the FAA regulation, and the idea that, and that will bring me to which regulation system, which regulatory system your country is using, the American one or the European one. They are different. But it has very significant economic consequences once you adopt one of the two. It has impact on maintenance, it has impact on behavior, it has impact on many things, on the equipment that we buy. So you want to have as many countries adopting the regulatory system that is European and not American. And Europe was trying to enlarge its sphere of influence. For instance, we found that, Georgia, when we arrived, Georgia was part of what is called Eurocontrol. Eurocontrol is the European organization that in fact it does, control and arrange the flight over the skies of Europe. It was established for the EU countries, 28, or the number is 28, plus the three, and Switzerland somehow in between. But all of a sudden it was Georgia and others. The negotiations started very slowly, and it accelerated steadily as time moved forward. The last year was very hectic. But most of the participants spoke about the trees, not about the forest. And you are in a danger that you will be pushed to speak about another tree and another tree and another tree and another tree, and you're in the danger to lose the overall side. I was fortunate enough, not fortunate, privileged enough to have two European co-negotiators, Mr. Carlos Mestre from Spain at the beginning, and then he was replaced by Mr. Klaus Gale as my co-partner, co-negotiators. And that brought me back to the idea that no matter how technology takes you forward with the fax and all those words, at the end, these are people who can find the middle ground, who can find the point where the two sides can live together. I read all the time about artificial intelligence. I think maybe we could have given artificial intelligence to make the negotiation between Israel and Europe about open skies. Don't think that they have, artificial intelligence has a chance to do it. One more word about the working with the Europeans, which was very enriching. After we signed the agreement, the agreement was signed, we had the first bilateral meeting in Tel Aviv 6 months later. And I decided that I don't want the second tier to sit in the room. I don't want to be El Al or Kia or Israel. I represent them as much as I represent the hotels in Israel and everyone in Israel. And I don't want to see the European pilots in the room. And that was a great shock for the European mission, and that was the main topic of the first meeting, but they accepted that we cannot have two sets of people in the room. One that are working, they are civil servants, Israeli or European, and a second tier that has no limits, no requirements. They can talk to the media, they can talk to each other, they can do whatever they want. They have no limits. In Israel, the struggle against the agreement was very tough, and in the last 2-3 months, it became, as many times it happens in Israel, very personal. And I had to defend the process on TV, on radio, and to answer numerous letters from different law firms. I think at that moment the Minister of Transportation, Mr. Israel Katz, came in and showed what happens when someone who swims in the political pool becomes the lifesaver. He knew how to make it in Israel in such a way that at the end we succeeded to pass the decision in a government meeting, not without hundreds of El Al employees that did not fly for 3 days, standing in the yard, in the streets around the Prime Minister's house. But as I said, it was signed. We went to Luxembourg to sign the agreement. It was a poor ceremony. I've never been to Luxembourg before. So we flew to Brussels, we spent the night, and then we took a car and we were driven to Luxembourg. Until today, I don't know where Luxembourg is, but we went there. And that was a meeting on, I guess, 8 dozen other issues of the ministers. So the Open Skies Agreement with Israel was something of this size for the meeting in Luxembourg, and I felt sorry for the minister that he went all the way, and what was called the ceremony was so poor. I never had in the Air Force such a poor ceremony. But we signed, and we were driven back to Brussels, and we took the plane and we flew to Israel. Signing an agreement is setting the playground. Great deal of the burden then is on the operator's shoulders. And the operators is everyone I mentioned, or many others that I didn't mention. They suppose to take the right steps so the curve will be the blue curve. You cannot carry on running El Al the same way it was run before, because the world changes. Technology, regulatory system, the choices of the people. If you do not run all the time after the changes, you left behind. And no one will do it for the hotels in Israel, for El Al or Arkia, for everyone who is in the business of aviation and tourism. And I hope that those in Israel that affected by the agreement will play their hands in a thoughtful and professional manner, because the bottom line is that I don't know any other agreement in the last 10 years or regulatory decision that affected the life of Israelis, not even the Israeli wet dream about the cellular phone tariffs, that affected the life of Israelis as much as the Open Skies Agreement. So I want to thank everyone who was part of it, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoram. Ron. It's fascinating to hear about the process, and I'm sure that you have many other stories, additional stories to tell. I want also to thank the EU delegation for the support, their continued support for I think the last 12 years in our Europe Days, and it gives me great pleasure to have the ambassador Emmanuel Joffre, the head of the EU delegation of the European Union to the State of Israel with us. And he's the ambassador here in Israel since last September. And beforehand, he was also in Israel. He was the head of the section in the delegation, the head of the DCM section, is a delegation in Tel Aviv, the political section.
The DCM is the chief of mission.
Yeah, okay. In Tel Aviv between 2003 and 2007, where he had his first born child a year, 1 out of 3, lovely boys. And since then he advanced to be the head of section in the EU delegation to the UN in New York as counselor, first counselor. He was then assistant to the managing director for North Africa and the Middle East at the European External Action Service in Brussels. And that was during the Arab Spring, so it would be probably interesting for another talk. And since then, he has also moved to be the head of division for democracy and electoral observation, and that was between 2013 and 2017. So I think without further ado, Emanuela, please, you can share with us the EU perspective on the Open Skies Agreement.
Well, thank you very much to Maya for her introduction and to the European Forum at the Hebrew University for having me today. It is a very timely symposium on open sky for many reasons. One of them is that this week we celebrate Europe Day, so it's our anniversary, and we celebrate it with a positive story, as Maya was saying. We tend to focus very much on the challenges that Europe is facing, which is, I think, absolutely right. It's something that we need to look at, but we also need to look at the successes. Because if Europe is still there, is still very much alive, with a new economic growth, new perspective, is because the project is actually working, it's functioning, it's advancing. And this transportation success, the Open Sky, is one of those. And the other reason why I think it's very timely is because to me, it's a bit of a cycle. I was here between 2003 and 2007, and I came back 10 years later, and I look at the things that haven't changed. Herman Bunz is still here, although he has left now, but he was here 10 years ago, and I found him here back. But certain things have changed dramatically, and when I go to Ben Gurion and look at the departing boards, and I see the number of flights going to Europe, and the arrival time, because when I was here 15 years ago, it was good to arrive around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It was normal to have a decent price ticket. And now you can decide if you want to arrive at 3 o'clock in the morning, at 5 o'clock in the morning, at 7 o'clock in the morning, 4, 5, 6. You have plenty of choices. This is a fundamental change. It's something that's changed dramatically the way Europeans are traveling to Israel and vice versa. Now, as Euro-Rom has asked what is the motivation for Europe, I think he probably pointed out a number of good reasons why Europe wanted to engage with Israel at the time on this topic. But there was probably a more fundamental geopolitical reason that is linked to what we called at the time the European neighborhood policy. And the idea at the time, after the last enlargement of the EU to the east, was to see how can we create, at the time we were talking about a ring of friends. I'm not sure we have managed to create fully a ring of friends, but I think some of the hypotheses at the time were right, and I think Israel and the Open Sky prove it. The idea being that what Europe could offer was a huge market of 500 million consumer, 500 million citizens, an area of stability where you can trade, study, and do research. And this is what could be offered to countries around, knowing that we cannot maintain that stability and prosperity without sharing it with the countries that are our neighbors. And the attempt was to try to integrate the countries in the east and in the south to our own area of prosperity and stability through a number of deals. And to integrate them, allowing them to participate in our market and in our programs of research, programs of environment, etc. And obviously, the first step you need to take is to facilitate transportation, because you cannot decently trade, decently have people-to-people contact without facilitating transport. So strategically, there was also an element of making these contacts easier, and of course, Israel was a country that was ready to take the challenge. We heard it wasn't easy. But we did it also with other countries like Morocco, and in the east we're trying to do it now with Tunisia. But that's the idea, that Europe can serve as an anchor of stability because it's in the interest of our neighbors, but it's also in our interest to have stability around our borders. Since then we had a lot of upside downs. We had the Arab Spring, the Arab revolutions. In the east we have new challenges following the presence of Russia in Ukraine. But I think the fundamental idea is still there and is still valid. It is personally a great pleasure because when I was here, we started this negotiation. The beginning was the negotiation on the horizontal agreement because there was a legal change in the EU, and we need to introduce this legal change with Israel, and that's how we approached the Israeli counterpart. And I remember a lot of cautiousness on the Israeli side, and it's great that we see now that this has been overcome, and now we are in a different era. And this type of decision, this type of agreement imply people. I think it's, as the European project shows, you need to have interest, but then you need leaders, people that are able to carry this idea through. The European project was a success because in the 50s we had visionary leaders, Jean Monnet, Konrad Adenauer, and many others, that thought that perhaps in the short term there was some loss, but in the long term it was worth trying. And this is how we brought the European project forward. And I think everything has its own dimension, but the Open Sky was also a success because we had leaders, people able to see that we could carry it through. And I should remind everyone that in 2013, the political relationship between the EU and Israel, of course we are very close, but we go through ups and downs, and not all the time are good. And some people say, is it the right time to make such a step on one side or the others? And we managed. We managed because we had people at the technical level and at the political level that saw the advantages of going beyond what we had at the time. And as Gera mentioned, on the European side, Carlos Mestre and Klaus Gale were the negotiators, and they would have been very pleased to be here today with you, and they send their greetings to this audience because they participated with great enthusiasm to the adventure. And I have to say that on the Israeli side, General Rom spoke before me was a driving force as the Director General of the Civil Aviation Authority, with his colleague Ishai Don Yehia, that I think is here. They really played a very important role. I wasn't here, but people that were here and that negotiated this deal told me that they've been instrumental to get us where we are. So it's a great satisfaction for me today to welcome the agreement that is now successfully implemented after 5 years of transitional phase, and we are an agreement that took us in a different era of transportation, and it made a quantitative leap for the EU-Israeli relations, because it's not only about how many people we carry from one side or the other of the Mediterranean, but it's about the ramification this has on not only the economic dimension, which is very important, the GDP theory that is key, but also the people-to-people contacts and the various implications it has on contacts between people. So the agreement has fundamentally a huge positive impact and has created new opportunities to interact for the business, but also for private citizens. The agreement enabled Israeli citizens to have the possibility to discover and to get to know the wider European space, the country of enlarged Europe. And of course, at the time of the negotiation, we would of course imagine that Israeli would be traveling to Paris, Barcelona, Berlin, London and Rome, and perhaps Budapest and Krakow. But then we discovered, because the agreement showed us, that we have now planes full of people going to Cluj, Napotza, Kozice, Debrecen, Katowice, Isai and Varna. And I'm not sure that we all know where all these places are, but there are plenty of Israelis that know exactly where they are, and they actually enjoy and they go there in great numbers. We have this with us today. This is an agreement that has, since a few weeks, has fully liberalized the market, so we have reached an important stage. It was not a foregone conclusion in 2013 when we started. As General Rom said, we have the operators with their choices step by step have made the right decisions and taken to a different place because the agreement was probably sound in the first place. He had foreseen and made the right decisions and put the right pillars there. So in a nutshell, this agreement provides us for an efficient framework for our aviation relations. And what is the impact of this new framework? So I'm going to try to give you a few data, and I've seen the data a few days ago that we got them from our colleagues in Brussels, and they're really mind-blowing in a way, because between 2013 and 2017, the passenger traffic has grown from 7.6 million in 2013 to 11.9 million last year. So it's a growth of 56% in 4 years. And what is interesting is that this trend is not a standard trend. There's a momentum building up because as we have an average growth of 11.8% over the period of 4 years, last year, or from 2016 to 2017, the growth was of 16.7%. So the trend is clearly growing. Now, in terms of total number of seats available on scheduled flights. We moved from 7.2 million in 2013 to 13.1 million, a growth of 82%. Now, over the same period, seats available on Israeli carriers, because Maya asked us to think about the loser and the winner. So Israeli carriers, they moved from 3.1 million to 5.4 million. So even for Israeli carrier, we saw an increase of 77%. Now, the number of weekly flights, the frequency between Israel and the EU, has grown from about 500 flights a week to 740 flights a week. So it's a growth of 49%. Now, what's the impact on Israeli airlines? Because again, this is one of the issues that was very much in the mind of the pilots at the time. So apparently, Israeli airlines used to have 42% of the market in 2013. What's the share in 2017? It went down from 42% to 40%. It's a limited decrease, while the overall size of the pie has increased significantly, as we said. So I think the gain is clear. The number of routes linking Israel to Europe grew from 43 in 2013 to 91 last year. It's a growth of 112%. And the number of routes operated by El Al grew from 22 to 36, so a 64% growth. So even El Al has significantly increased the number of routes. So I think this is a very, telling story. Now if we look at the other side of the coin, which is the cost, what's the impact for the Israeli consumers and European consumers as well in terms of cost? Now the cost of the ticket overall decrease of 15% for direct flights and 40% for non-direct flights. So in a country that has seen a tendency to see prices going up, and the cost of living is a problem for everyone, to see something so fundamental, because Israel is linked to the rest of the world only by planes, to go down by 15% to 40%, I think this is a very significant achievement for our corporation. So these are the numbers, these are the figures that I think that they tell us a very clear story of success, a story of a revolution. It's a revolution based also on very close cooperation by the people that have designed, built this agreement, and are managing the agreement. In fact, the agreement foresees a joint committee that is responsible for managing the implementation of the agreement. And I can tell you that the regular meeting, with the meeting not long ago here in Israel, is very productive. I think it helps everyone to exchange on legislative and regulatory development in Europe and in Israel, and teach us to address the doing business issues. And we do this in a very successful manner. It's also a step that has brought closer Israel and the EU in the transport sector. A few months ago, we had the visit of the Director General of DG Move. DG Move is the service in Europe that is dealing with transportation. And we have agreed to launch a high-level dialogue on multi-modular mobility. So I think it has further ramifications, and I'm sure that with our colleague we might find a new way of cooperating in his new capacity. We also look at how to tackle existing and remaining barriers to free flow and movement. For example, security is a new issue. We launched negotiations to set up a one-stop security for flights from Tel Aviv to EU airports. Negotiations are progressing. We have a team of experts coming recently, so that basically you would need only a security check in one of the airports, and then you can freely travel to Europe. So we just get rid of the visa that never existed. We have plenty of flights. And if we can make progress on security, which is a hard issue in Israel, I think it will be another great step ahead. So I think we're just seeing that there are it's something that has brought immense benefit on the two sides. I'm not even touching the benefits of the tourist sectors that we will hear afterwards. I think it brought immense benefit in terms of people-to-people contact, because Europeans can come and see the reality in Israel. We know that the media tend to project an image of Israel that is not necessarily always a positive image. It's always linked to conflict and violence, often so, not always, but often so. So people be able to come here. The Giro d'Italia was here a few days ago. I think it brought a lot of very nice images of Israel, and they will probably have a positive impact on the Israeli tourist industry. So I think I'm really happy that I was here today to discuss and talk in depth of a positive story, of a good story. There are many others, but this is a very good one. So I thank again the Hebrew University to have invited me today and for choosing this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Joffre. We have a few minutes for questions. Please, you introduce yourself shortly.
Hi, my name is Saf. I'm a student in the German Studies program. And I wanted to ask, it's a specific question about the security issues. I remember in Tzuk Eitan, I don't know the name,
Protective Edge.
Okay. I was sitting on a plane in EasyJet. Hamas promised to fire rockets exactly at 8 o'clock. The guy next to me was sweating and afraid because 8 o'clock was our time to depart. And they gave an ultimatum. And around 8 o'clock we started moving and we flew via Haifa and so on. And I thought this is very exceptional. Also coming back now from Berlin, I was sitting in the back hearing the flight attendant telling her comrade about this case, about how they were afraid of missiles and so on, in a kind of like a morak, and I was wondering how come it happened. Did Israel give some guarantees to EasyJet, to those companies? Did the EU intervene in any way? How come in the middle of rocket attacks on Israel, the commercial airlines didn't suspend those?
We'll take another few questions and then please, Toby.
Thank you. Toby Green, a postdoc here in the Len Davis Institute here at Hebrew University. Ambassador, you alluded to this just very briefly. I'm interested in the relationship between the agreement and sort of political background, because already in 2008 and 9 there was a connection made in the EU between upgrading relations between the EU and Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and I wonder if that connection ever played a role from the Israeli side or the European side, if you ever felt that in the background, and did it cause any challenge in reaching an agreement in those political, that political context?
Okay, and there's another one. We'll take two last ones and have your opportunity to answer. Please.
Dr. Barak, former Minister for Foreign Affairs and Ben-Gurion University now. The agreement was not ratified by all the countries yet, as far as I know. Do you expect any problems?
Okay, and last question.
My name is Ruben, student here at the European Forum. It's a question more directed to Mr. Rom about, you mentioned that the agreement was maybe a European try or an act to implement normative power outside of the EU to a different sphere. And I'd like to ask you, do you feel it as if the agreement itself, not only adhering to the different standards that were necessary as part of it, actually managed to increase and maybe expand the normative power within Israel after all the previous agreements already conducted with the EU?
We're going to reverse order, just because of the order of the mic.
Well, I think the first question, perhaps Ambassador Barak is better placed than me, because I wasn't here at the time of the. I'm talking about the question about the implications of the overall political connection and context of the signature of the agreement, and I wasn't working on this file at all. But the lesson that we can draw from this agreement is that even if always the political context is sometimes not the easiest one between Israel and European Union, there are ways to work on areas of common interest. And when we have a right approach and the right context, we can make progress. And the open skies is not an issue in Europe. And those that might be critical of some of the policy of Israel, this is not something that comes up as an example or as an object of criticism. So it's something that has produced benefit across the board in all countries. Everyone that want to come here or to, even if they want to go to the West Bank, they have to go through Ben Gurion, so it's helping everyone. It's not an issue, and I think I would respond also to you, Ambassador Barak. I don't see any problem in the ratifications and the final ratification, and actually, no, I think there's absolutely no concerns about that. It's universally considered to be a good thing, and this is why we're really happy. Now, on the question of security, I'm happy that I have a general next to me, because I'm sure that he has much better knowledge.
I'm not sure that I understood your question, but if you ask about the nature of the agreement, the agreement was okay. I don't think it was between two unequal. I mean, between an elephant and a small animal, and it all the time comes to the regulatory issue. And from what I remember, there were a set of rights that Israel could have only if we adhere by European regulations, which we thought that they were okay. I think that the general idea, the general opinion was that the European regulatory system is a good one. It's a good one. And in retrospect, and we had the chance today to start from the beginning, I wouldn't be surprised if we adopt the European approach and not the American approach. But we had the European, the agreement, and we adhere by the agreement. I guess Ishai will talk about it later. The story of protecting Edge, trust me, is a story, it's a long, fascinating lecture that I can give. For 51 days, more than 5,000 rockets flew in this region, both ways, and unlike all the previous forecasts, 21,000 flights were flown to and from Israel, not only by El Al and Arkia and Israel, but by, I guess, about 60 or 65 or 70 foreign carriers. We didn't take chances. We prepared ourselves to a situation where there will be another round with the Hamas, and this time that will reach the Gush Dan, the center of Israel. And at that time, in a very, you say immodest or unmodest, I would say the negative of modest. Unmodest way, I want to say that toward 2013, the Civil Aviation Authority of Israel was the king of the hill in Israel about civil aviation. We led the program how to prepare ourselves to operate the 21,000 flights while 5,000 rockets fly to each direction, something that never happened in anywhere in the world. And it was all under control, and there were hundreds of decisions taken at my office, all of them in a written form. No one in Israel was allowed to take any decision about civil aviation other than at my office. And if you ask me, I don't speak about the military aspects of protective edge, but on the civilian side, maintaining Ben Gurion open for 51 days was the biggest achievement Israel has achieved in any, civilian I speak, in any of its recent and last 20 years of conflict, either with the Hezbollah or with Hamas. And it came only because we planned it. We worked very close with the Israeli Air Force and with the Airport Authority, with the leading of the Civil Aviation Authority. And there was a small niche. On the 10th day, there was a rocket hit Yahud, which was 1.84 miles from the fence of Ben Gurion, and the American carriers stopped to fly. Ben Gurion was not closed down. Many carriers continued to fly. The Americans stopped it, and the European, the EASA, which is the European Aviation Safety Agency, highly recommended European carriers not to fly, but most of them agreed to fly. And I have to say with a lot of pride, I wrote a document called A Declaration about the Safety of Flight to and from Ben Gurion that went to all the world, to all the carriers, the civil aviation authorities, everywhere. And it was accepted. I spoke at CNN, at the BBC, wherever. I got telephone calls from the Deputy Minister of Transportation of Russia about the Hamas threats that were sent to all the countries and all the carriers via mail that they are endangering the life of their citizens. And we responded to each and every one. And if I have to summarize, I go to personal issue. If I have to summarize my 6 years at the Civil Aviation Authority, the pinnacle of my tenure was that we maintain the sky of Israel open in a very unusual modern war. I want to remind you about closing down Ben Gurion, that 51 years ago, the Egyptians closed down just the way south of Israel. And we went to the World War against all the Arab countries because we felt in a curfew. Had Ben Gurion been closed down, and that was the strategic goal of Hamas as being said by Mashal, by, what's his first name? Khaled. We didn't meet for a long time. Khaled Mashal. And he said curfew will be reacted by curfew. And what he meant is that you put curfew on the Gaza Strip, we will put curfew on Ben Gurion. And we worked very diligently with the Air Force and with the Airport Authority to maintain. And now, that was sending crews to hotels in Herzliya, to meet the security representative of Air France and KLM, and I remember the Korean or what have you, and to make a lot of changes. But we felt that we didn't put anyone's life in a greater danger than we were supposed to do, and that we took chance. So I felt very thankful to all these non-Israeli, if I may say non-Jewish, pilots and stewardess and everyone who continued to fly. I was very surprised personally. I was very surprised that Spanish or German or what have you, pilot and stewardess, who planned to fly to Tel Aviv while they could fly to Palma de Mallorca or what have you, and they flew to Tel Aviv. And I thought that I had to be a pilot and to fly to Tbilisi. You know, when there are rockets between Georgia and Armenia, what have you there. I'm not sure that I would fly to Tbilisi that evening. But we have 21,000 flights to and from Israel. And that was thanks to very thorough preparation of a year and a half here in Israel.
So I think this is the third story where you succeeded to have an open skies in Israel. First one was in your military service, and then the open skies agreement, and now during the custody operation. So I very much hope that the skies will remain open and the future would be bright and pink, so to say, between Israel and the EU, at least in the economic and functional policy fields to advance the relations further. And our next roundtable after the coming break would actually discuss the what Ambassador Joffre has started to illuminate about the social, economic, and geographic implications of the Open Skies Agreement, and we have 5 years to reflect upon. And I assure you, we have quite interesting topics, presenters to discuss this. So enjoy the break and be back with us at 6:30.
Is there another one? Well, they put foundations in Israel there, so you can have a lot of knowledge. Yeah, they have commissions out there. I think that's all. I didn't hear about this one.